Hello,
Hi.
everybody. We are live. I'm gonna just confirm that by clicking the live. Yeah, we are live. Okay, it sounds like a bit first man on the moon. But I turn this off. Okay. Hi, everybody. Third appuntamento event of ESSE, my exhibition here in Palazzo Sant'Elia in Palermo. And in this appointment event, we're having two guests. First one is Anfisa Vrubel. She's joining us from New York at the moment. Anfisa is the editor in large of Art Observe. And Aleph Molinari joining us from LA, very elegant. And joining us from LA, as I said, and Aleph is doing a lot of things, and one of them is co-editor in chief of Purple magazine, which is dealing with fashion, art, and music and culture in general. And hi, and thank you for being here. I am, as tradition is becoming a tradition, looking at the chair, becoming a tradition, each and every talk, a conference, panel, I'm changing a room of the exhibition. There is like maybe 11 the panels. We already did two, and this is the third one. And then 11 panels and 3 concerts, dialogues of music and the artworks, and in each and every panel, I'm going to end that hour of dialogue conversation in a different room. So here we go. We might have public passing by, and that's the first actually piece of the exhibition. That's the first room of the exhibition, and this is where the exhibition starts. So, little introduction of the exhibition for who didn't join us in the previous talks. ESSE exhibition is a solo show I started to work on 2 years ago. ESSE for the S in Italian that represents Sicily. The symbol of the exhibition is horizontal S to showcase also the concept of my work, which is another point of view of the reality we're familiar with. And this is another point of view on Sicily. That's for the S. It's also representing incompleted infinity, as it's reminding a bit the infinity sign. And my work is dealing with the invisible, dealing with the absence, and as a direct connection to the title that my fellow speakers decided to title this exhibition, which is Disappearance, or Sparizione in Italiano, for all the Italian public that's watching us now. Thank you for being here. And yeah, I think that I'm not going to speak much about the exhibition, as I hope who can come will come and see the exhibition in person or look at it on it online. But it's important to mention that the exhibition is dealing and dedicated to light pollution, which is the one of the most significant challenges environmental challenges of our times, and it's dealing with light pollution because my work is made and created by the night, using low light, using natural darkness. I walk during the entire night, walking in when it's night and leaving when it's still night. I never see the place I've been, and I discover it in the artwork, and I never saw it in another way, as well as the public itself. The visitors cannot see it in this way if they find where I've been, which is very hard because normally I don't do registration and I don't know what these places are. So I generally have an idea about where I've been, but I never can return to exactly to that point where I decided to stop during dark, feeling that this is the place I should stop and work. And yeah, that's more or less a brief high. Maybe I give the stage to Anfisa, and we start our dialogue. I will put on mute, Anfisa, so you can have all the stage for you here.
Okay, Rafael, thank you for the brief introduction of your work. It's a very interesting project, and I'm very happy to speak a little bit, to give a little bit of maybe context from the environmental perspective. So to introduce myself, my name is Anfisa Vrubel, and I'm an editor-at-large for Art Observed. It's a contemporary arts publication in New York. I studied government and environmental policy at Harvard. And now my writing explores the intersection of art, culture, ecology, and politics. So Rafael's wonderful and thoughtful project has inspired me to contemplate what it means to represent nature and natural phenomena in a world in which reality is increasingly mediated through technology, and technologies that are more often than not obscuring reality rather than elucidating it or illuminating it. Taking the disappearance of the name of Rafael's project, and focusing more on the appearance, what appears. How can we represent nature and phenomena such as light pollution, which is so disparate? The environmental emergency is, I think, a crisis of our philosophical habits of thought and representation. Do we really have a clear representation of the natural world through the media we consume? I think that judging by our inability to conceptualize climate change, the different types of pollution, such as light pollution, carbon pollution, our general impact on the planet, or hyper objects, as philosopher Timothy Morton called them, I would say that we need a radical reconceptualization of our place in nature and how we represent it through art, through photography. Post-industrial anthropocentric thinking posits that we exist apart from nature. Nature is darkness. Technology and progress illuminate. What if we flip that concept on its head? What is lost when everything is quantified and documented and illuminated? Where did this fear of the dark, the unknown, come from? To begin to answer these questions, I think we must define certain concepts, such as the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is the post-Holocene epoch that we are currently living in, and it is defined by humanity's outsized impact on the world, on natural systems, on the environment. Aleph and I, we recently interviewed this incredible art historian and cultural critic. His name is TJ Demos. He writes a lot about how art deals with these questions of climate change, of our relation to nature, and he dissects different projects. different artistic practices. And so we interviewed him for the Purple Future issue, and I would like to quote his exact definition of the Anthropocene, which I thought was very well put. He writes that the Anthropocene has emerged in the last couple of decades as a geological term for the current post-Holocene epoch we're living in. It refers to the era when humans are the dominant agents of geological transformations such as climate change, melting polar ice, land alterations, the alteration of the chemical composition of rivers and oceans, carbon and light pollution. He contests the usefulness of the term just because it lumps all of humanity under the same umbrella of responsibility and cause and consequence, which of course is not true. We can look at the global south and see that even though they contributed less to carbon emissions in the atmosphere, they will and are already suffering an outsized proportion of the consequences of climate change. That discussion of the Anthropocene and its merits and demerits as a term and concept, I think there's a lot to it. So this is a contextual recap. I do believe that for all of its shortcomings, I think that it can be useful in a toolkit of concepts that we use to begin to think about nature and how we represent these phenomena through art. I would also say that the Anthropocene is, apart from being a geological descriptor, I think it's also a state of mind. Anthropocentric thinking affects how humanity relates to nature, how we view ourselves within, or rather apart from nature. And relevant to this talk and Rafael's project, I think anthropocentric thinking affects how we represent it through photography. I think our current age is characterized by the constant presence of the world through social media. We are constantly living with images of the world. So I think there's a paradox there. There's a collapsing of distance. Everything seems always at hand and visible. And at the same time, most people, I think, overestimate the vastness of the world. I think it's much smaller, more interconnected, much more fragile than many would come to believe. This brings me to the concept of hyperobjects. Hyperobjects is a term that was coined by Timothy Morton. He's a philosopher and professor and a member of the object-oriented philosophy movement, and his work explores the intersection of object-oriented thought and ecological studies. And he recently wrote this really good book called Dark Ecology, and he explores the concept of hyperobjects. And what hyperobjects are massive entities such as climate change, such as light pollution that Rafael's project talks about, that are so massively distributed that we cannot grasp them empirically, we cannot grasp them with our limited human perception alone. And it's part of the reason why some would argue humanity is not able to mount a concerted effort to combat these escalating crises. It's because precisely we cannot grasp these natural phenomena through our limited representation of the world. So Rafael's project, I think it was quite interesting to me because it really challenged notions of how we can illuminate landscape, for example, how we can represent something that's so ephemeral yet very physical, such as light pollution. How can we make a poignant statement about that? And I think Rafael's project really accomplishes that. And I think that's where really art comes in. It expands our purview and our perspective, and it is capable of representing these hyper objects, these phenomena that are otherwise difficult to grasp. And it creates new imaginaries for us, new representations that then we can take and analyze and store in our vocabulary, both visual and written, or yeah.
Yeah, I would like maybe to mention in that context that
And I think I would ask a question. Maybe Aleph can start his talk about photography specifically, is how can we create new imaginaries to help us conceptualize the state of the world, cultural, natural worlds, the way that it is right now?
Yes, I want, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I just unmuted my microphone.
Okay, just a sec. I want to just reply a comment to comment on what Anfisa just said, that in my work, the way I see what is happening is that because I'm using the darkness, and also in this exhibition in particular during new moon, so there is not even a moon. For me, the light that you see, the light that appears in the artworks are the glow of the reality, and not an external lighting. That's also been proven by scientists that the material, any material, is an energy that that contains also light, and this light that in the material is hidden by the daylight, for example, because it's very low, and it's we are not incapable to see it normally. And for me, the light that appears in that reality is a glow. It's a bit different than just a little comment continuing Anfisa's ideas, and thanks Anfisa, it was very interesting. Aleph, please, I am going mute.
Yes, well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this talk. I work as editor-in-chief of Purple Magazine along with Olivier Zam, but I'm also a contributor for Materia Press and other publications. And I also happen to be a friend of Rafael, so I know him, and I know that he's more of a 19th century character, as you can see in the screen. You know, he's someone who is from another time and who is kind of an explorer of nature, and he works very much in the same sense that 19th century photographers used to work, where they would go out into the mountains, where they would go and explore, where they would take their entire chemistry and they would just pack everything and just put it into this expedition to represent nature, which was a concept that had just been crafted at the end of the 18th century and the 19th century, which nature meant everything that is out there, outside of our society, outside of the limits of our scientific development, of industry, of the urbanized. So nature was really properly represented within the 19th century. And Rafael's work is very much, at least how I see it, is within that tradition of someone who is seeking the image at the borders of society, at the borders of what is industrialized. And what really he's seeking is to see things under a different light, and more in his perspective, to see things under a different glow. And that has been one of the most important functions of photography, to represent things that cannot be seen by the naked eye. And photography has changed the way that humans have been able to relate themselves to the micro and to the macro world. So photography allowed us to see under a microscope, to see bacteria, to see organisms, to see the microstructures of the things that we touch, the things that surround us, the things that infect us, that kill us, or that make us live. And in this tradition, there's been many scientists who have been more of artists, like Karl Blossfeld, who photographed plants and organic forms, and who was just obsessed about the geometry of these things in his scientific exploration. And then there is the other perspective, which is the more macro, the telescopic perspective that has allowed us to look out onto the stars, to look out in search for life in other planets, to detect celestial bodies. And this, I think, is very much one of the most sophisticated fields. The representation of the world around us has sophisticated to such a degree that now we can see things that are not even there, things that appear within seconds when we accelerate particles and we make them crash, and then we photograph that for a second. And what we see is this burst of energy, this happening that happens in microseconds or even less, that is just a manifestation of matter in a different form. And then on the other scale, there is the development of spectrography. So spectrography is the visualization of other frequencies of the energies that surround us, one of the most important being light. And this is what allows us to detect if there's life or if there's water or what type of components there are in other planets outside of our solar system. So we can look out into other quadrants of this massive universe in which we're part of, and it tells us if there is a feasibility of living there. So, I mean, this is one of the most incredible things in terms of how this apparatus of the 19th century has taken new dimensions into looking at new spectrums of the light frequency, being able to see things that we cannot see with our naked eye. And then there's other terrifying uses of this. So while we have been also looking out into the stars to find life in other planets, that spectrography has also been turned onto the Earth. And so now we can see what's under the layers, under the strata of our Earth in order to mine it. So a lot of mining companies are using this other way of seeing to be able to find the new economies, to find with more precision what to mine for our society, for our ever-consuming technological development. And so it's also terrifying. But what I see in Rafael's work is that what he seeks is, of course, a way of seeing things under a completely new light, under a new spectrum of understanding of nature. And he's also kind of a vampire, I have to say, because he goes out in the nights when there's no moon to look for the image into the most extreme conditions. And I think that is always part of being an artist, to be a marginal, to be an outsider, to not be a zombie. So in that sense, I think he very much fulfills that very traditional function of the artist. But what I also like about what he was saying just now is that everything, in a way, is energy, and energy is manifested as one of the most important phenomena, which is light. And that light has many frequencies. And when you photograph, as Rafael does, for very long exposures of time with analog chemistry, with analog cameras in the middle of the night, and then you just let the machine absorb the glow, the radiation, the different frequencies, you're able to see things completely different. So he's pushing the possibilities of photography. And what results is an image that to me is very eerie, yet familiar. It's an image that has this milky aspect to it, where you're seeing day manifested within the night. It's a way of seeing without seeing, to me. It's like what I imagine sometimes to, blind people to visualize space. And that to me is one of the most incredible things of his work. And of course, the relationship to nature, that it's allowing us to see spaces where nature has not yet been contaminated, or that are some of the few islands of places that are not contaminated by the development that we're encroaching on nature constantly. So I think that's a very incredible aspect of the work, that it represents the last areas in the planet where you can find true darkness, and darkness where other plants and other animals are allowed to live, because the more light, the more these entities are also being destroyed. Yesterday, I'm in Los Angeles, and yesterday I went to buy a SIM card, and I was at T-Mobile. And at T-Mobile, they had this map that was animated with magenta, which is now their new advertising campaign. And so you can see in magenta, in the map that T-Mobile is presenting to you, the effect of the frequencies of cell phone reception that they're creating in the nation. And I couldn't take a photograph, but I wanted to show it today. But it was really incredible to see that it has become this web where there is no space without reception anymore. And what does that mean? That we're talking about the urbanization and also the intervention of these other frequencies. And so we're living in a society that is not allowing us to have darkness, and that is radiating us with light, with cell phone reception, with with things that give us cancer, with things that don't allow us to integrate with nature. So I think that's a very important aspect of Rafael's work, to represent these areas of nature that are not as affected by this constant feed of information and of technology and of industrialization. I don't know if you want to comment on other things. I don't want to do like a full monologue. I have other chapters. I don't know if you want to comment on this.
Yeah, I would comment on the last sentence, or this idea that went along with all what you said, that the press release is mentioning that the work in this exhibition, and generally what I do, is of a reality that doesn't need a man.
A reality that doesn't mean what?
A man. I mean, a reality that doesn't need us.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can be very good, but we also did a lot of damage to something pure that we received, and I mean, that's more or less reflecting this, the way you describe what I do, and not only me, but work in place which and introducing those places which is not contaminated and doesn't need them, and showing this idea that we are living in a place which doesn't need us. Basically, mm-hmm. we need the nature doesn't need us.
Yes, which is a paradigm, the reigning paradigm, that we think that we're destroying nature, but really the only thing we're destroying is our habitat. Yeah. So nature and the geological time and the more expanded
deep time
evolution does not require humans, but we do require what surrounds us. And what are we destroying in the favor of our cell phone reception? Is that going to be the demise of us by the way we're contaminating everything around us?
Yeah.
Well, sorry.
Go ahead. No, it was very interesting what you said, Aleph. I think it does kind of call us to challenge the notion of a separateness between humanity and nature. I think we've really, just like you said about the cell phone service, we've really expanded into so many far reaches of the planet that really there is no wilderness, or there is no pristine nature that we can go to. So we have to, I think, in this next step of our evolution of thought about nature, I think grapple with the fact that everywhere we go, now there's this intertwinedness that most is characterized by our by what we leave behind, whether it's trash, whether it's pollution, whether it's, you know, just we leave traces everywhere. And so darkness in that sense, I think, is an interesting metaphor, because it could be a metaphor for going off the grid, which is so difficult to do. We are all very connected technologically, and yeah, there's really no more frontier, so to speak. So it's interesting to reconceptualize ways of highlighting what is left of original nature, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Anfisa, for that. You guys titled the conversation Disappearance, and I would like to touch this a bit in regard to the exhibition and the way you see disappearance, what disappearance is represented for you, representing for you. And another thing that I want maybe right after to touch as well, just before we started the live, Anfisa and I spoke a bit about darkness and fear, and there's another thing that I'm curious to develop a little bit the time that remains for the talk, and to just shot the beginning of disappearance, and then I will let one of you to continue. It's something that I'm not always mentioning, either because I forget or I'm not sure why, but as I mentioned to Anfisa just before, in each and every work, for example here, I appeared in the artwork, all of this work which I'm doing for many years, when I started to work with the moon, and then little by little cut out even the moon. Those are self-portraits, and I'm always there. So it's in a way appearance and disappearance at the same time, exactly like Aleph mentioned just before, which is it's a night and a day at the same moment. So I'm there, and I'm disappeared, but I'm appeared. Of course, you don't see myself there. It's impossible, but I'm just there through the night, which are hours of work. I'm always going in front of the camera, spending sometimes an hour just in front, placing myself with a chair or sitting on a rock or whatever. But it's impossible ever to see my image in the artwork. So that's just to start a bit the subject of appearance, disappearance, and yeah, I mean, who wants to start? And I'm going
I mean, I can start with that. So why disappearance? Well, first, because of the philosophical qualities of photography, which at its heart, photography really is about representing something that is fleeting, something that is no longer there, something that is a slice of time and space, and that is a product of the representation of that particular moment. So those are the qualities of the memento mori, the moment of death of the photography. So if you take a portrait of someone, that person will change, will die, and then this is something that we feel when we look at 19th century photographs, or when we see the photograph of one of our ancestors who's no longer there. So in a way, it's kind of a very I don't want to put it under a sad light, but it does have kind of a tragic aspect to it, because you are photographing some of the last places in nature that most likely, from the looks of it, will disappear. So what is disappearing? It's nature, it is darkness, and it is the possibilities of life surrounding these spaces that you photograph. And really your work is about photographing the unseen. So when you photograph the unseen, that is something that is also going to disappear. So it's this constant dialogue between representing something that you make appear and that will disappear, and that you cannot see with your naked eye. In the same way that a particle accelerator does this enormous amount of energy to create this moment that you can represent something and make it appear, but then it will disappear. So it's a constant sway, a constant back and forth between something that materializes itself and that disappears. And that, I think, is part of the duality of the work, that it's the day that is also the night, and that it also questions to you, what is the day and what is the night? If you can find the day and the night, it also has some, Taoist or even moral aspects to it, if you want to have that reading. But another thing that I find interesting is that your work is a bit akin to what John Cage said, that there cannot be silence in nature, because we always have that interior heartbeat, because there's always some sound of what we are produced of. So in that way, there is always some form of frequency of light that is going to be detected. So there is no real darkness. What there is the possibility of seeing under which frequency and under which conditions. So I think your work is really about representing those in-between spaces where we do not see and make them appear. But then it's also a material object, your photograph. So it will also, in some way, become a ruin. It will also degrade, it will also fade, it will become another of the objects that will decay as we do, as the world will do, and it is part of time. So you are taking that slice of time and showing us this moment. So everything will disappear in a sense.
Yes, I think it's also just going off of what Aleph said, I think it's also a metaphor for the transience of life and the fragility of the natural world, and to be able to capture slices of that, and to really just to be able to contemplate them for longer than that moment is occurring. I think that's a beautiful thing. But I think it also shows that nature, yes, like our civilization will probably be, all that will be left are ruins that will be overtaken and overgrown by nature at some point. The forests will return, the fauna, the flora, everything. And so really it's about the perseverance of life, even though perhaps we are pushing so much against it, where there are no pockets of darkness truly, or pristine nature, whatever that ever meant. I think it contextualizes and that dynamic between the human world and the natural world, even though that's one and the same really, but just to make those two distinctions, distinct categories. And I really like that about this project. The time aspect of it, as I was saying.
Yeah, you want to, sorry, do you want to say something, Aleph?
Yes, and then there's also, going back to this aspect of appearance and disappearance, the photographic process is one where you're continually dialoguing between what you see and what you don't see, especially when you photograph analog as you do, where you have an idea, and that is the first moment of seeing intellectually. Then you might do a drawing, you might conceive it as to how you're going to achieve that photographically. Then you go out into nature, you hike in the middle of the mountains for hours after you've taken a car or maybe a flight, and you go to this place that you've been seeking out. And then you sit there with your camera, you look through the viewfinder, and now you have a compressed view, a very selective frame of what you're going to include. So you're unseeing a very large percentage of what you're seeing within the viewfinder. Then you do the mechanics and the calculations in order to do your exposures. And then you press the button. And then you sit down and you're chilling in nature, or freezing maybe, and you're just looking at night. And then the exposure finishes and you hear the click, and then you do your other exposures, and then you go down the mountain, you take it to a laboratory. By that time, you've forgotten what you have seen through the viewfinder, because your experience is mediated by the whole experience of it, not just the image. And then you develop the film, and then what comes back? Another way of appearing. So then you get this tiny little negative, and then you decide to blow it up. And so the photographic process is one of a language of constantly seeing and unseeing, and changing languages, and being able to represent it in different scales of seeing. And I think that's one of the most incredible parts of the photographic process, of materializing photography as an artist, especially when you do it in a large scale, and when you do it with such long exposures. And the surprise that comes with that is really one of the most gratifying things, because Rafael, unless you have some DNA of a bee, I don't think you can see in those light frequencies, but your camera can. And by forcing the exposure to such length, you're able to receive other of those light frequencies, and I think that's a very beautiful part of the work, and it's kind of a more poetic and profound way of doing it than another device that was used in cinema that I really like, which was used in film noir, and it was also used by Truffaut, which they would turn the day into the night. So they would do the opposite of what you're doing, and they would add these very heavy blue filters.
It's called American. What's it called? American Night.
Yes, his film American Night, which was one of the first ones where he used it. But then it was used also by film noir, where they would shoot during the day, and they would make it seem as night with very heavy filters and very contrasting light, so that it would seem more dramatic. But that's kind of a caricature. But your way of treating this is much more poetic and much more delicate, but it's kind of the antithesis of that process.
That's good you mentioned. It's something that filmmakers that knows my work and always mentioning to me with American Night. And it's a technique that, I think it started in the 60s, you say, and created also to save budget, because working in night is much more expensive. And that, reducing the light is totally different concept, idea than creating light. Much more easier also. And you said another way of seeing just before, mentioning that sentence, reminding me my TED Talk, which I did in 2013 in Mexico, in San Miguel de Allende. And that TED Talk is also available online, and it's titled Alternative Reality. And I'm mentioning exactly this, I'm saying exactly this sentence that you, Aleph, just said, which is lovely to hear it again, and to see how these ideas are merged, and we see things very similarly. And another way of seeing is something I'm using at that talk. And Anfisa, I want to maybe say some words about fear and darkness.
Well, I think that goes back to the fear of the dark, the fear of the unknown, the savage nature that in the 1800s, especially, when you had a lot of new nature writing emerge, right? From the frontier, nature is always depicted as this dark forest that is antithetical to civilization, to light, to religion, to anything organized, and it's always threatening to kind of undermine humanity's order. So I think the fear of the dark, the fear of it's tied to that. I think it's very much part of anthropocentric thinking of needing to illuminate everything, to quantify and categorize, and that I think removes an essence of mystery, an essence that is necessary for us to commune with nature in a way, because we can't know everything. We can't just laying out a topography of a landscape. You can't, it doesn't give you the essence of it, for example. So I think darkness needs to remain. There needs to be areas where metaphorical and literal, where we can go to and to be able to appreciate our place in this world. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that, unfortunately, but hopefully through art that captures this essence, we can preserve our appreciation for how fragile it is, and maybe replicate it in some thoughtful, conscious way, and to be able to hold on to that fleeting moment, as Aleph mentioned, that it's a way of it's a memento mori. It's a way of grasping onto something that's so ephemeral.
And darkness, at least to me, has always been a very important teacher. By not seeing what's around me, it's a way of having a new form of vision of the self. And I think darkness should always be there, because we cannot see light without darkness. And it's always a way to isolate ourselves and to start looking into other ways of seeing that do not sometimes require the eyes. And I think that part of your work is in large part about that, about representing what we cannot see in the darkness, but is there. And that teaches us an important lesson.
First, in that context, also we always use historically. Also, we always use the word vision to say to speak about ideas, and not physically vision, and to see things in a different way is also to think about things in a different way, not necessarily seeing them physically. And in the context of fears, I found just before the talk, when I spoke with Anfisa, that video I did with young, little children, which were then maybe 6 years old. Maybe today they are, I think it was funny to think about it, but they were 6, it was maybe 10 years ago, today they are 16. So funny to think about it, but that's with the non-profit organization, voluntary activity I did with them. And the purpose of the non-profit organization is to develop for kids an ability to be more patient and understanding each other, and understanding the difference between us. So no matter who we are, where we're coming from, what we like, what color skin we have, and so on, we don't need to be afraid from the unknown or from the different. And that's something that the darkness is sometimes providing, this fear of the unknown, because you don't know what's there. I work always with these conditions where I don't see anything, I don't know what's there. Of course, it has always a fear aspect. I can't lie that there are moments that my heartbeats are going faster while working. But this is fear is something that we develop within ourselves. It's not necessarily that there is a risk when we are fear of something. I would like to show this work. I will share my screen. This work I did with the kids. This activity, they were 6 years old, as I said, and this activity I did with them we created together, the kids and me, class, actually from Milan. The nonprofit is London-based with European activity, and the artwork is a video that I guess you see now on the screen. I will just go back, and here we go. This is the artwork I did with the kids, and I asked them to bring torches, and they came in the morning with torches, and we did all this beautiful activity that I registered. It's all by darkness, and all what you see, the movement of the torches, of each line is a kid, and then I edited it to 15-second video, and that was showed in an exhibition where the kids came and saw their own work, and it was amazing. And I think that was a lovely thing that I managed to give to the kids, and let them think about the unknown and the tolerance that they have to develop to the different.
That's beautiful, and especially because really that's what photography is about painting with light. I mean, it's in the etymology, you know, the graphos of photos, you know, the representation of light and how you paint with it. It's beautiful. And another series I really like is Wolfgang Tillmans, you know, the way that he drips the light, these particles, where you see the frequency of the light in these large scale works. That to me is also one of the most beautiful representations of the act of photographing as a way of painting with light. And also, we live so bombarded by images today that I think the more interesting terrains of photography are in the more abstract periphery of the medium itself, in the process of production, and also in the type of light frequencies that are received. I think photography has to enter into a very meta stage to be able to represent something new, something that we can be part of.
Yeah, I was on mute. Amazing, yes. Well, we are almost an hour. Let's start to close the conversation, and I'd like to thank you guys to join that and making the time. And I hope you both will be here by the end of the month, or maybe beginning of June, when you are coming to Europe. I can't wait to receive you here and have some good time in Palermo. And I want to share with you, public, that the next talk would be next week, actually this Saturday, on the 13th of May, on 6 p.m. And it's going to be with Studio Drift, with Lanake and Ralph, who funded Studio Drift. I don't need to introduce Studio Drift, and I'm very happy they are doing that with us. The talk would be about the connection of art and design with environment, and how to make art and design in time that environment is something that has a priority, and how art and design can promote those ideas, and considering these ideas while in the making. It's a bit what I'm trying also to do, and this is the topic of the talk with Studio Drift. and I hope you're gonna join us. And then a week later, we're gonna have a concert with Yakir Arbiv, which is a dialogue. Yakir Arbiv is a pianist that he born in Rome and living in Paris and grew up in Israel, and is an amazing composer. And Yakir has no vision, so he works in similar condition as mine, without seeing, and his improvisations are outstanding, beautiful, and we will try our best to stream it live, as music is a bit more difficult than a talk stream. But this is 20th May, and who will listen to us and can come, you're all welcome. You really have to try and come and see this concert. And I cannot promise it's going to be on streaming. And well, that's it. Aleph, you want to close? Anfisa?
Well, thank you so much for inviting us, Rafael. I'm really looking forward to going and seeing the show. I've seen some of the works, and I've been close to this whole process of the exhibition, and I'm very excited to see it. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Rafael. Yes, we're looking
my
forward.
pleasure. Thanks a lot. And whoever wants to look on the entire program of the public program, the list of the talks, is welcome to go on the Fondazione Sant'Elia website. All the information is there, and very clear. And well, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Hi to LA, hi to New York. Ciao, ciao.
Yes. Ciao.
Thank you, guys.